Hey guys, welcome back to another lesson. Today I'd like to talk to you about 10 tips for making the most out of your time when practicing piano. And you can see the tips on the screen right here in front of you, and we're just going to go through them quickly. And I broke them down into two parts because there are really two things you'd probably want to do when learning piano. The first is learning like a new piece. And the second is working on your theory, your chords, the more general concepts. So with that being said, let's just go through them one by one and I'll break them down. So the first tip is don't rush. And this means don't try to learn faster than you can. Take your time when approaching a new piece and treat it with a certain amount of respect. It's going to be difficult, it's going to take you time. I know you probably want to start playing it immediately all the way through, but just give yourself a certain amount of time to both learn the piece and also overcome the technical difficulties. Don't try to play faster than you can. Start slowly. Give yourself time. Often learning a piece takes weeks or even months. So that's the first tip. Just take your time and treat the piece with respect. The second tip is don't overreach. So don't pick pieces that are beyond your current state. You should basically, the guiding principle should be that the pieces that you're learning should be just enough of a stretch to challenge you, but not to become too challenging so as to discourage you. If you pick too hard a piece, it has, you're not just wasting your time, but you also run the risk of playing things incorrectly, developing technique wrongfully, and I think worst of all, just damaging your self-esteem and making you feel like you failed something. And that's usually not a good feeling when you're learning. So don't overreach, pick your pieces correctly. If you feel like it's too much of a challenge, just put it aside, go for a simpler piece and then come back to it when you have, once you've progressed. All right, let's now get into more specifics. When you're tackling the piece, you should probably break it down into manageable chunks, so a few bars at a time. And in particular, you should identify those particular points in the piece that are a problem to you. That usually means from a technical standpoint. So, if there's a passage that's difficult, or there's like an arpeggio that you can't really manage, or some sort of leap, anything basically, you should identify that and work on these different sections individually. Don't try to play the piece linearly from beginning to end. Just break it down. And this has the added advantage of, being able to target the problem areas. Think about it. If you have a 1-minute piece and you're starting from the beginning each time, it's going to take you 1 minute to reach that, maybe problem area that you're having difficulties with. That's kind of wasting your time. You're playing parts that you're already comfortable with, and you're not addressing the real issues. So break it down, identify the problem passages, and focus on them. And usually breaking down a piece to chunks is a good idea anyway, even if there aren't any super problematic passages. Still, it facilitates your learning. A well-known thing about learning is that breaks actually make a real difference. They really help you internalize information. So if you have 30 minutes to practice, they would probably be best served by, say, practicing for 15 minutes, taking a break for 30 minutes, and then practicing for 15 minutes again. Or if you have, say, 2 hours a day, you can practice for 1 hour in the morning and then 1 hour in the evening. Of course, that depends on your schedule. Sometimes it's impossible, so you have to do the best with what you have. But if it's possible, remember to take breaks, just go do something else and come back to your practice. The fifth tip is about interleaving, and that's a really useful tip. Basically, it means that if you're working on a couple of things simultaneously, and let's say you have a fixed amount of time, let's say you have 30 minutes, and you have two topics that you'd like to practice. Now you can sit for 15 minutes and practice topic A, and then 15 minutes and practice topic B. Or you could do 5 minutes of A, 5 minutes of B, 5 minutes of A, 5 minutes of B, A and B. The second option, where you interleave them, is actually quite helpful, because what it does is it forces you to sort of break the monotony and distance yourself from the piece, and then come back to it and re-examine it with fresh eyes. Now, the fact that this works is well known. Why it works, that might be a question that you should address to a psychologist or a neuroscientist, but it's fairly well accepted that this sort of interleaving is helpful in learning things. The sixth tip is to keep a schedule, and this has to do not with the practice session itself, but with the fact that you commit to yourself to practice for a certain amount of time a day at a certain hour. And it's kind of like going to the gym. If you keep a schedule and you keep at it, chances are you will, just sustain your gym activities. And if you just go like every now and then when you're in the mood and you don't have anything else to do, then your practice or your workout will be a lot less effective. And this is the thing with pretty much anything in your life. And so try to identify, let's say, if you have some time that you can set aside in the morning or in the evening or anywhere in between, where you can practice your instrument. This is very important, and if you can keep actually this schedule for, let's say, a couple of weeks, then it will become routine. It will just become part of your everyday routine. And this is another well-known thing. If you do something for, like, say, 3 or 4 weeks, or on the order of a month, then it becomes a habit. It becomes something that you do continuously, and it sort of gets integrated into your daily schedule. It's the same thing with physical activity. If you run, then people who run, and after a certain amount of time, sort of get into the habit. They just wake up in the morning and they go out for a run, and they just keep up running. Once they break this initial barrier, once they keep up at it for a few weeks. So the schedule makes you follow your plan, and keeping it up for a few weeks will ensure it becomes a habit. Now, a couple of tips for those of you who are learning theory or practicing chords or more abstract concepts, so not a particular piece. And these tips are extremely useful when trying to pick up new ideas and concepts and reading through books and so on. Probably the most important tip is to quiz yourself. So you're reading something, you have a new let's say concept that you've learned. Stop, take a break, and try to sort of explain to yourself what it is you've learned. Or maybe if you're, let's say, another example, let's say you're trying to learn to play all major chords, all major triads. So there are 12 keys, and each major triad has 3 inversions. So there are 36 different total number of chords or forms that you can play. So you have to remember 36 things. Now you can make like an exercise where you go, let's say, from key to key, from C to D flat to D to E flat to E to F. Go up half a step each time, and in each key just play all 3 forms: root form, first inversion, and second inversion. Or you could just randomly throw out a key and an inversion and then challenge yourself to play it. So say something like F first inversion and then try to play it. A flat second inversion, play it. D flat root form, play it. E flat root form, play it. And just randomly go through these things. And this will actually force you to improve your memory of these concepts much faster than going through route memorization. So quiz yourself, just do these things, test your knowledge, and you'll be amazed actually at how effective this is. Another tip is, once you've learned a concept, see if you can explain it to someone else. Let's take a concept. Let's take, borrowed chords. And imagine that there's someone in front of you who doesn't, hasn't heard of this idea. And come up with an explanation. Explain this to this imaginary person. Or if you can actually find someone for real, then practice it on someone for real. And forcing yourself to explain something to others actually forces you to really sort of get a good grasp of the idea itself. Because if you don't have a good grasp, you're going to find out that it's really a big problem for you to explain this idea to someone else. The last tip I'd like to leave you with is don't brush off difficulties. So this kind of has to do with the first tip we started with, which is don't rush. And it says basically that, when you're learning something, if it's a piece or it's theory or whatever, you're kind of building a tower, right? You're building the first floor, and then you're building the second floor and the third floor, because each concept, each part rests on the part that came before it. And if the parts that came before it aren't well established, if you really haven't given them the time they deserve, then the floors that you build above it are going to be shaky. And this means that you really make sure that you understand something before moving on to the next concept in line. If you're learning theory and you're learning jazz, then you will probably first of all learn about, scale degrees, and then you'll learn about, let's say, something more advanced like triton substitutions. So make sure you understand scale degrees really well before going on to learning triton substitutions. Or if you're learning a piece, or if you're learning piano in general, make sure that when you play a piece, you play it correctly, so you don't sort of develop bad technique. And this will often require you at times to slow down. Once you encounter a difficulty that you didn't expect, you can rush past it. You're going to say, oh, it's going to be okay. I'm just going to, so I'm going to have a couple of bars that are kind of messy and don't sound really good. And then I'll move on to the next piece. So that's one way you could approach it. But really the correct way to approach this would be with some humility. So look at these bars and say, okay, so there's a point here in the piece where I'm really struggling. So, I'm going to take some time off. I'm going to take, say, a couple of weeks, and I'm going to focus on these bars. And I'm going to maybe look for exercises that target this particular technical, finger dexterity. And I'm going to really work at these, and then go back to the main piece. And that sort of humility is very important to building a strong foundation, to building your tower, to recognizing that basically you have to get certain concepts under your belt and before rushing off to more complicated ones. I know it's very tempting to want to play the complicated pieces or to talk about the complicated theoretical concepts, but you have to make sure that your foundations are good. So don't brush off these difficulties when you encounter them. Have the humility required to spend the right amount of time on them. That's basically it. I hope these tips help you maximize your time practicing and learning new things, and that you've learned something interesting, and I'll see you next time.